No one wants to spend it on environment because there's no return on investment in most cases. I think I made money once, and it was kind of by accident.
What's your read on where environmental performance in heavy manufacturing is headed over the next decade?
I think it goes back to
Meet Jack John R. Skelley, Corporate Environmental Manager at Gerdau North America, who has spent 40 years in environmental work, including over 30 years in the electric arc furnace steel industry. He's here to talk environmental compliance, technology, and his next chapter in consulting.
right now at the state and federal agencies. They are looking at ways to use AI to go through all of the reports, the permits, all the paperwork the government has to do.
What's your honest take on what AI cannot do for environmental management?
I don't find that remarkable. It's just humans are doing that. It can just do it faster. What I don't see in environmental intelligence is thinking.
What would be the one thing that you would tell that next generation coming out on how to handle environmental and technology in the future?
To me, I think the biggest thing.
Environmental performance in heavy industry only ever improves if someone decides to care about it enough to fight for it. 40 years is a long time to do anything, but when you've spent 40 years solving environmental problems in some of the most demanding industrial environments in America, you're accumulating wisdom that very few others have, and that's something this industry can't afford to waste. Our guest today is someone with that kind of experience, and we're thrilled to share his insights with you. I'm Julia Dubois, CEO of TenForce, and this is the Pragmatic Safety Podcast, where hands-on leaders with decades of experience show us how to make safety and environmental performance more practical. Today, we're getting into what it takes to develop environmental programs that hold up in complex manufacturing operations, and it's time to get to work. Welcome to the Pragmatic Safety Podcast. On this show, we get into safety culture, environmental performance, what it takes to lead in high-risk environments, and how technology and sustainability fit into the pictures. Today's episode is about the unglamorous, essential work of keeping heavy industry in compliance and improving over time. We'll be going over the day-to-day systems and habits that make environmental program work. Jack Skelley is the Corporate Environmental Manager at Gerdau, one of the largest steel producers in North America. He has spent more than 33 years working in the electric arc furnace steel industry, overseeing environmental compliance across facilities in more than a dozen states. For 4 decades, he's found pragmatic solutions to environmental challenges. Welcome to the podcast, Jack.
Jack, let's start from the beginning. You've spent about 40 years in environmental work, more than 30 of them in the electric arc furnaces steel industry. What drew you to the environmental field and also the steel industry?
Well, it's God works in mysterious ways. I started out wanting to be a fisheries biologist, and I did my master's in aquatic toxicology. So I was studying fates of and effects of chemicals and things in the environment. But like a lot of naive young people, you realize you get into a field that really doesn't pay much when you get out. So I started off with a consulting firm in Florida, and I was doing some of this work, but then I was also doing a lot of field work. We did engineered solutions of taking wastewater to wetlands. And so did that for a number of years. I worked with the military for a few years as a civilian environmental person. From there, I was a regulator for a year. That really didn't work out too well for me. And then eventually I got into steel. And I found an industry that could put up with me and I could put up with them. So
All right. I would think that the compliance in the steel industry is really high. It's a highly regulated industry. So how does that work with the environmental compliance?
most environmental compliance, and like I've taught people over the years, it's about 95% accounting. The biggest overall thing in a heavy industry with environmental compliance is you have to prove your innocence. Now, normal jurisprudence are innocent till proven guilty. In environmental law, it's exactly opposite. Is that you're assumed guilty and you have to prove your innocence. That's why on permits, and there's so many rules, you have to show that you are not harming the environment. So it's a huge accounting thing. And so it takes a lot of organization. You have to be very attentive to detail. You need to be awake because steel is like one of the 6 major industries that they tend to go after because most prosecutors and regulators know they'll find something. Oil and gas, chemical, petroleum, steel. So we have basically every environmental law except endangered species. Well, and that's
Okay.
pretty much true.
So you did the studies in environmental biology. How do you keep them both aligned and in check? The industry, the environmental compliance for the industry, but also your background in biology.
Well, they played hand in hand because a lot of people understand one but not the other. And some people making rules really don't understand reality. So a lot of times they like people like me that we studied the environment. So if you're going to make an environmental rule, you can make something that's absolutely ludicrous and does nothing, doesn't help at all. Or they're thinking that, oh, well, we have to regulate to zero. The environment can't take anything. Well, again, that's not true either. We're part of the environment. What comes out of one thing goes into another. That's the cycle of life. So the environment has the ability to work with things. So this whole thing about zero, it's not reality. So that's where I would come in. It's like, yes, okay, arsenic is poisonous. Yes.
Yep.
But there's arsenic in the environment all over the place. We actually live with it. Lead, is that poisonous? Yes. But we live with it every day. There is a level of okay. There's a level that we can live with. And that's the kind of reality that I've worked in and tried to work a balance through my career. And especially that helps with rulemaking because every time that a scientist or a chemist figures out a better technology that, oh, well, we went from part per million to part per billion to part per trillion. We got our part per nillion, and we can go even lower than that on some things. Well, every time they go lower, they want to make the regulations lower. That's really not needed because there is a level where we can tolerate it. And it makes sense on a public, if you're a public administrator, you can't have everything at zero. You can't have everything at an absolute. There has to be a level where we can deal with it. And there is on almost everything out there that you can think of, including PFOS and PFOAs, which they say there's no safe levels. Yes, there are.
Okay.
Yes. So that's where my biology helps
Yeah,
because
it helps.
I
Y-
can get down to the science.
Yeah.
I can read about subcellular chemistries. I can read about, and I understand what's going on. So that's where I can help.
All right. So that helps for the industry. You've been working in the steel industry for quite some years, but you also worked with facilities across more than a dozen states. So I would also think that that kind of breadth would teach you a lot or bring a lot of complexity on the environmental management. How do you work with the different, I guess, would assume regulation and perspective from different states?
Well, I've had to learn, and albeit sometimes the hard way, that there's a lot of different ways of accomplishing the same thing. And when you start traveling around and you look at different regulatory scenarios, there's no one way to regulate water. There's no one way to regulate waste or air or any of it. Canada, while they do it similar to the US, is different. Canadian permits and regulations are very different. Their focuses. Not everybody's focused on the same thing. Some people think one pollutant parameter is horrible and they focus on just it and they don't focus on much else. Others, they want to focus on everything. California. Ugh. So, yes, I worked out there too.
Okay. So indeed, then those environmental programs that we all set, either from the state, the industry, or even individual facilities, they often look very good on paper. We hear it, big goals that everybody wants to achieve, but somehow they seem to be struggling in practice. Where does that gap usually come from, in your opinion?
Well, on the industrial side, usually where I see the gap between the rules and getting it done is three basic things. You have to have a discipline program, you have to have accountability, and you have to make tasks doable. A lot of times they'll say, Jack, I don't want to hear about it. You just take care of it. All right. And then other times, sometimes I have to come and ask for lots of money. That really doesn't ever work. No one wants to spend it on environment because there's no return on investment in most cases. I think I made money once on an environmental project, and it was kind of by accident. It was a recycling project.
Okay.
But that's on the industrial side is that you have regulations, you have to meet them, and you have to develop with the company discipline to meet them, whatever that takes. It's a combination of man, machine, systems, record keeping, all that. You have to have good follow through. Like it or not, audits are necessary. You got to look at what you're doing and be honest and where you need fixing, you need fixing. But then there's the accountability, and that's where a big part of it falls apart. I've had a lot of issues where you work with unionized facilities, and the first thing is, no, not going to do that. That's in our permit. Well, show me where labor law trumps our permit. It doesn't. But we have the constant fights. So there's a lot of things there. And in the end, you have to have your top down support. If you don't have the support of your leadership, there's no program that'll work.
And how do you bridge that gap on accountability? So, okay, you need to have support from leadership. Today, I think there's quite some, at least public leadership that also wants some environmental outcomes for their facilities. But how do you bridge that gap then on accountability, and what would be the main tools that you'd use?
Well, I've found over my career that you want to get personalities out of it. And the best way to do that is have things very objective. And honestly, the advent of computers and being able to do things electronically, they don't lie. The situation's there. If it's a problem, it shows up and you deal with it. Otherwise, when it's all people, you start to run into egos and, and all the people dynamics that are out there. But I like to see it more indirect and more objective, and that's where I really like where the industry's going on a lot of these automated tracking programs where you're tracking your tasks and your follow throughs. That's very impersonal. That isn't one against the other, and I really like that. One of the best programs I ever put together or was part of is years ago, I was sent with a bunch of other people to learn how to build websites because we were having terrible problems of getting training out to people, getting communications out to people. And, in the early 2000s, everyone was on the web. Everybody. It's just like social media now. So we learned how to build websites. And and I know you're a very sharp person on IT, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. And so we learned how to build the websites using our little tools and all the various things. They call them gadgets, gizmos. There's all sorts of names they use for how you put a website together. And we got all the company information on there and put it out. And within a week, I was starting to get complaints. And I thought, yes, they're looking at it. They're actually using it. And and it really helped. It helped, help get information out. People started asking questions. They could find their information, or if they couldn't find it, they were yelling. That was good. But getting communications out, keeping it impersonal, keep it where people could use it, and you didn't have to rely on all these formal information chains or chain of commands, to me is huge. That's been the biggest help in, bridging that gap. It's because most people, if they have the information, they'll help.
So, training, information sharing, education, basically educating the people. This is a key aspect in environmental programs. And then you said the auditing, not only to punish, but also to monitor and to give some feedback on the program. Is that the biggest tool? I'm sure that it's not the only ones, but the biggest one that you see?
They are, and something I'll say about the auditing. The way I was taught years ago is you want to set it up as an attorney-client privilege work product. And you're not trying to hide. Actually, you're protecting yourself because when you do it like that, and you do it the proper way, you can actually be open in discussions with your plants, your leadership teams, and people. You can discuss issues. Those communications are protected, those documents are protected, but everyone can participate in the process, and you get more buy-in that way. And it's not just, oh, that's Jack's project or that's Joe's issue, or it becomes ours. But that's a very important thing for anyone doing this kind of work. If you're going to have an audit program, make sure to consult with an attorney about the proper way to make an attorney-client privileged work product, because that saves you. That keeps the conversations where they're at. It allows you to control when things should become discoverable, because obviously you don't want to use it just to hide stuff, but you want to have a chance to prepare what you need to solve the issues. And then as you are required to, in everyone, you can't just find something wrong and not say anything about it. But this is a way at least you can control the process a little.
Does it also require a change in culture
Yes.
for those companies to go for
Yes.
something where the auditing is actually a tool and not, as you say, something that where we try to hide the outcome? So it feels that it has to be a habit of thinking about this, of taking the environmental program into account and not just an outcome, basically.
Yes. You have to have a culture that is committed to being compliant. And by what I mean by compliant, legally compliant. You have somewhere in your company structures and documents that you will operate legally in the areas where you do business. And honestly, I don't know anybody that isn't like that anymore, uh, despite the fact that there's a lot of hype out there that, oh, well, these are the big bad industrial polluters and all this. No, it really isn't. We do deal with lots of materials. They are big. At least in steel, our processes are awesomely powerful, hot, and they're not nice. They're not nice to be around. They're hard to control, and it takes quite an effort. And some people see that as in the wrong way. I see that in a great way. I look at these steel furnaces, the steel that they make. I think of all the children that have put through college, all the families that have been raised, all the infrastructure that's been built, all the products that have been made. Just the steel companies I work with, the steel goes into everything from medical tools used in surgeries to the coffins at our end of our life. It's every day. So I look at it different. I don't look at them as big and nasty. I look at them as a tremendous gift.
Okay. There's also a big part of recycling in the steel industry, more and more, or have you seen a trend that evolved regarding recycling in the steel industry?
There has been a trend. It started in World War II, is when we started using the electric arc furnaces. Integrated steel makes steel from iron ore. And so it goes through a blast furnace that makes it into iron, and then from there into an oxygenated furnace that turns it into the steel, and then it's cast. But it always starts with ores. Well, after many years of the integrated steel making steel, World War II needed steel, and they needed more quicker. So they invented the electric arc furnace steelmaking. And to understand it, everyone's seen a welder, right? The guy with the goggles and the little thing, and big, smoke and everything. Well, imagine instead of welding on a plate or something, we've got a bucket that's about 20 to 30 feet wide, about the same amount deep. It's lined with bricks, and then the electrodes, instead of these little pencil-sized welding sticks, are actually about 2 feet in diameter, and they come down into the bucket, hit the steel, but instead of trying to make it a weld and put a liquid steel between two pieces of solid, they just make it into a pool. That's what electric arc furnace is. And so, yes, electric arc furnaces use already made steel. So this industry is the biggest recycler by weight and volume of any industry out there that recycles. So, and it's going to get more. There's going to be more out there. In US, it's somewhere around 60 to 70% is scrap based now, and 20 to 30% is ore based. And that's going even further in the recycling direction.
That's impressive. So, when it comes to environmental compliance in steel, we said it involves air, water, waste. We talked about the recycling, remediation, and much more. How would you keep that manageable altogether? What are the tools? What's the key to keep it manageable?
You really have to learn to compartmentalize. And what I find that's helpful, at least in my last 10 years, is finally computers and computer systems, programs, various platforms are starting to help with that. Before, I would call it a digitally manual process. Okay, we had Excel spreadsheets, Lotus 1, 2, 3, all that. If you were good at managing your spreadsheets and you made sure you had your equations right and you were good at your data input, you didn't have those fat finger days where you were transposing data, you could make it work. But it was very hard. But one of the nice things I've seen is the development of intelligent databases, the ability to link stuff together to make it into a platform that you set it up, it's auditable, it's traceable, you can see what's going on. And I really do think that's going to be the way of the future because one of the problems we have is folks like me are retiring. I'm at the end of the baby boomers. And it's hard to transfer a lot of knowledge like this, but a lot of the knowledge is in know-how and in the organization. So if the organization of how you do this is set up electronically, then the brains are in the computer, like Dr. Zola. So I see that as a big help because as people turn over, you don't have folks working 20 and 30 years in the same place anymore. 2 to 10 maybe, you know. So there's turnover. There's a gain and loss of knowledge, and companies have to have systems that keep that, and that's what these allow. And to me, that's a godsend. I've always wanted to leave knowing that I gave the people behind me a chance at being successful in their jobs and careers. And I'm close.
And what do you want to instill to all the people you've mentored, the ones that are coming up behind you? So you want to give them some tools, but what other part do you think is important for the next generation of environmental managers to pay attention to?
Well, the biggest thing for me is a couple of things. One, I wish somebody had told me to pay attention to politics more when I was younger. Politics and the regulatory environment are intertwined. You can't separate them. And you just can't say, "Oh, I'm not a political person." Or, oh no. If you don't pay attention, it pays attention to you. And I wish somebody had thumped me on the head a little harder 30 some years ago. But yeah, you have to be honest. You have to be transparent as much as possible. You have to be verifiable. That's a big one. That really is a big one. Because a lot of times people say, "Oh, well, I was at 2 part per million." Yeah. How did you measure it? What was your method? How'd you take your sample? All these things are important. So, attention to detail, pay attention to the politics in your regulatory environment. You need to participate. Oh my gosh. You just can't hang it up at 5 like Fred Flintstone and go home. That doesn't work. You need to participate. If wherever state and county or parish that you're in, you need to be involved to be in this kind of position. Not that you're running for office. I'm not saying that, but you're involved. You keep ahead of things, attend meetings, seminars, know your local politicians, know your local regulators, be part of your community and your schools. This kind of a job it's not the Flintstone type of job. You need to be part of the community and the business where you're at. You need to be part of it.
And I'm quite sure that the regulatory compliance around environmental programs has increased drastically compared to 30, maybe even 10 years ago, which means that probably there's a lot more to pay attention to today. How would you guide the next generation, and how do you keep all the information and all those new regulation in check? What are the type of techniques, or I would say approach, you would recommend?
I think what I recommend first off is to realize tasks are basically in two types of groups: routine and non routine. And the most systems that control the routine, you're going to control most of your issues. And fortunately, these type systems we were talking about, whether they're monitoring systems for monitoring pollutants, emissions, we monitor pumps, equipment, all that kind of stuff. The more automated you can make your routine, the easier it is then for you to be a manager, because machines and computers, AI, all that can handle routine. They don't handle non-routine. A non-routine is for humans. So where you can help the humans handle more of their routine so they're not spending most of their day on this stuff, that's the kind of thing I would tell people, that look for those kinds of opportunities, because we're way past the days where here's a stack of paper, go through it. No, we got to do better than that. We don't have time for that. We can't hire enough people for that. So I'm always looking at how can we make a new regulation into routine, into something that we can make as easy as possible to get done. So, for example, in security, a lot of times we use a lot of high-end cameras, monitoring devices, that sort of thing, instead of having guards everywhere. And the same thing with, if you've got to sample stormwater, wastewater, air, all that, there's a lot of automated equipment out there can do it for you. And if the equipment's automated and it can put out an electric signal, it can be wired into some sort of data logger or server and collect the information for you. If the information can be collected, it can be analyzed and set up as a report for you. All of these had to be done when I was first in. That was all manual. That was all of us run around. Packs of meters, clipboards, sheets. It was crazy.
I can imagine.
So these days, with all of this coming out even faster, and it's not just the big companies that are getting regulated more, it's small ones. There are threshold levels at every state I know of, and in all provinces, where there's a level below you don't need to do all this kind of stuff. So, no one's giving a permit to have a water heater in your home. That's crazy. But there is a level at which, you get big enough, you use enough resources, or you emit enough that there's a threshold. So I'm hoping they don't lower those thresholds any more than that.
Okay, as you said, it was clipboard and paper, so also so much data we could collect. Now we're talking about monitoring equipment, we're talking about collecting a lot more. You mentioned the reporting, so that's to ensure the compliance. Do you see any other use for technology in handling that amount of data that we have to learn to improve those environmental programs, or just to guide the people? How do you see that playing in the future?
Well, one thing I've noticed about programs, and that was just before AI, we were getting a whole lot better at being able to set up things to do analyses for us. And I think AI just kicks that in the rear end. It just makes it go quicker and faster. So I see some things, where we have to analyze samples, and a lot of medical and biological samples are tedious if you're doing it the old-fashioned hand way. But with AI, you can do counts, you can scan CTs, X-rays, MRIs, all that so much quicker, so much more accurately. My mom used to be a tech that used to look at stuff like that. She was the lady, making these reports, and it was just utter tedium. And you get through an hour of that, and you're looking at all these crazy slides, and pretty soon your head's bouncing off the desk. Well, AI can keep going. So I see things like that as a benefit. Um, on my side, I'm just now getting to where I can collect data and analyze it to where I can start doing trend analysis. I couldn't do that before. It was terrible because I'd have to get everybody's spreadsheet. I'd have to collate everybody's spreadsheet together. I'd have to set the analytics up, program it into the spreadsheet myself. Where now we can start getting the data and we have systems that are set up. And basically, as soon as you do the month end, you pull it in and you've got your stuff. So you can now be a manager, not just a technician. And I see that continuing to go. I don't see how it can't. It's going to be a challenge for folks. I mean, at some point, I can hear the HR people already. Well, gee, if I have that, I don't need him anymore. And well, yes and no. There's going to be those struggles. It's inevitable.
Yeah, technology is playing a bigger and bigger role in all in the environmental management today. I mean, we talked the monitoring, the sensors, the data collection, the analytics that we can do on it. Did it make the job easier or harder in the long term if you compare to when you started, or is it just a different job than what it was 20, 30 years ago?
It's all three. It
It's
is
all three?
easier in that a lot of the mundane stuff is done better, more regular. A lot of the routines are handled better. The harder is because there's more and more of it. And what I try to teach everybody is that in the environmental field, no one thing is all that difficult. But the difficult things is you got to do all of it and you can't let any of it slide. That's the hard part. That's the really hard part. And every time I see an enforcement and I read down into what's going on, almost in almost every case, that's what's happened. Is it's a case of where something got between the cracks, somebody just missed it, and you eventually get caught. Then that's the hard part, is doing all of it. But these systems set up right, you'll be managing it. You won't be wondering if you've gotten it all. If we set up correctly, this should be a major help.
Okay.
And not only just environment, but any professional who's looking at large quantities of data, having to do analysis, that sort of thing. That's how they figured out DNA sequencing. The computers finally got fast enough that they could analyze the data where they were separating the pairs and figure it all out, which was a very slow process by high phase chromatography. But now that you had computers that could analyze these things and they could do the bigger volumes of data, that's how they finally cracked the DNA, human DNA. So I look for more great things like that to happen, just because we can do the work better and faster now.
Do you think that's because we have this technology, it also gets more and more complex, not only in terms of workload, because you mentioned there's more and more, well, we said more and more regulations, but also we know better how to measure, monitor, audit certain things. So does that bring a level of complexity, or actually the technology simplifies a little bit some of the tasks that we have to do?
I think it actually, in the long term, it'll help simplify, because some of these things that were so difficult to do, so tedious, the technology allows us to do it accurately, repetitively, precise. And then, like I say, now that you can have more of it, you can see the data better, you can trend better. It's like, holy, I didn't realize that. Look. And you see something that you didn't see before, or you recognize a relationship or a reaction or an anomaly that, oh, wow, hey, cool. So I think it's going to help in the long run. A lot of the stuff that I deal with, it's not differential equations or high math or anything like this. It's just large amounts of basic addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and it's like statistics. It's like the statistical formula isn't hard, but what's hard is there's so much additive and repetitive stuff that you've got to do an analysis of variance. The math inside of it's easy, but the problem is it's such a big equation to get done. And so with the technology, we can do more of these things easily and then be able to rise above and see what's going on that was we were blind to before, because why? We're down here in the weeds. We aren't able to handle these large amounts of data.
So you've watched this industry navigate a complete shift in how sustainability is talked about publicly. What's your read on where environmental performance in heavy manufacturing is headed over the next decade? What do you think will change? What do they need to pay attention? What do we need to pay attention to?
I think it goes back that we're going to get more and more automated in our monitoring of performance. And so for your industry that's working on that, I see a bright future. And there's a lot of us out there that, okay, we are modern, we are in these industries, but a lot of the industries still have very, very old equipment, especially heavy industry. Heavy industrial equipment is not easy or cheap to replace. So that's why they try to keep a lot of these units going. And it doesn't matter where you're talking about a coal-fired boiler and electrical plant. It doesn't matter if you're talking about heaters. It doesn't matter about furnaces, machines. These big industrial machines and processes are difficult to replace. And I can name a whole bunch that are from the 60s and 70s, and they're out there running today. And I can guarantee you they don't have any kind of digital board in them at all. So there's a lot of what I call machine interface type of stuff that keep using these equipments in ways that we can then be able to control them better. Because a lot of this old equipment technology doesn't change much. But what does change is the monitoring and control technology. And so it's not there with flips and buttons and switches and all that stuff. I mean, that's crazy, but that's all we had. So as we move forward with these other systems or better systems, it's not that we're so much changing technology, but we're changing how we monitor and control it. And that's where the big advances are coming that I'm seeing right now.
Yeah. And with I would say, more talks about the sustainability and the environmental compliance, do you see also a shift on how organizations are going to pay attention to their environmental programs and environmental efficiency and compliance and performance?
Oh, absolutely. Because I know right now at the state and federal agencies, they are looking at ways to use AI to go through all of the reports, the permits, all the paperwork the government has to do. They're looking at going through that with AI and doing a better job of keeping up, which I must admit they need to keep up better. But on the flip side, AI is watching now. And so if that's the way they're treating our submittals, they'll be asking us for more data. So on our side, we need to be using the same kind of tools so that we can match and meet expectations.
So there will be more and more focus. Do you feel that also, especially with large enterprises, the being international and having different regulation depending on the different places, will that leverage more sustainability and environmental programs and more attention also to be compliant in all type of environment, or will the move for you remains very localized and more country, region, state-wise?
That's a hard one to answer. For example, the United States would like to have more industry. But one of the things that has happened over the years is, especially in the Obama and Biden EPAs, they've ratcheted down on a lot of the pollutants to where we don't have enough. I'll have to talk about a little bit about permitting to make this make sense, but
Yes.
we have national ambient air quality standards, and there are basic pollutants: lead, SOx, NOx, VOC, PM. There's three types of PM. There's the total PM, PM10, PM2.5. They've ratcheted PM2.5 down so much that there's no room to build factories anymore. We can't build anything more that will emit. They've ratcheted down too far. And so there's going to have to be a reckoning of regulations at the congressional level, EPA. I know Donald Trump would like to build more factories. but this will keep him from doing it. He could get all the money in the world, but unless we change how the regulations are set up and I would say realign them, what I was talking about with a lot of the environmental green side that I deal with, oh, there should be zero emissions to the environment. To which I say to them, I'll be on your side if you can show me how to make a newborn baby a zero emission unit. If you can't do that, we're not even talking. So it's like, come on, be real. And so that's the problem. There's going to be a struggle there. I think the environmental regulation is really as tight as it really needs to be. But I think there's got to be a realignment because we've gotten to the point where we want to do more, we can, but our regulations are such that I can't build a new steel mill. I can't permit it. You could give me $1 billion. I still can't do it. Not the way it's
Okay.
set up right now.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a hard question to answer. And I've answered mostly for the United States. Other countries, there's very little for keeping them doing things and not necessarily in the best way. So for those countries, it gets really complicated.
Because we want to have more environmental performance. So, meaning be able to produce more better, but having less of an impact on the environment. I think a lot of things have already been done in the past, but I'm also wondering with the surge of AI right now, and all the data we're collecting, the regulations, the different talk, the public view also on sustainability, how this will shift, and also what technology can bring, what's software, but not only software, also new innovation. Will it be the environmental performance? Can it be an innovation driver?
Oh, yes, I believe so. Because, like I say, a lot of science is made by people going through a lot of data, and there's a lot out there. But in order to see all these new trends and find something, the simple stuff is already figured out. So now we're talking about the bigger stuff that requires, a lot more data analysis, trending, a lot of chemical reactions. Uh, they understand basics of how a number of chemicals work. Well, if you're sitting there as a organic or inorganic chemist and you're trying to do mathematically what'll happen for the reactions and the stoichiometric analysis and all this, AI can do that way faster. So could we find some things? Sure. I think that's out there. Again, using how they decoded the human genome. They finally got computers fast enough to be able to do all the sequencing and figure it out. And now computers are even better. And now we have the AI to help us. And now, like I started out learning a slide rule. I literally did. And I'm reading about how they're trying to do quantum computing and, all this kind of stuff. And this is amazing. This has only been in 40 years. Only 40 years.
It's a very short time and a lot of evolution in such a short time. There's always a lot of talk about AI, especially I would say the past couple of years. It's been growing, and today everybody talks about AI on a daily basis. What's your honest take on what AI cannot do for environmental management in the industry, at least today and probably in the near future?
Everything that I've seen about AI so far is it uses what's out there and it tries to put things together however it's instructed to meet that objective. So I saw somebody says, oh, give me a country and western song that has all these different elements in it. And it wasn't too bad. Okay, it took from whatever it found and it made something reasonable. So for that, I don't find that remarkable. It's just humans are doing that. It can just do it faster. Okay. What I don't see in environmental intelligence is thinking. I haven't seen that yet. And I've got a lot of young people, hey, Jack, look, I just made a new stormwater plan. Look at it. I said, uh-huh. Was this chat, Grok, or where did you get this thing at? And, most of the time it was. It's like, well, this is fine. It's very general, but it doesn't know enough to go out and, get into the fine details. I assume maybe at some point that kind of step will be made. I don't know. It's a little outside of my wheelhouse, but I just can't see AI having epiphanies like humans do. I just don't see it, and I may be completely off.
We don't know where it will go, but today it's in the as you said earlier, and I like that it can automate a lot of the routine tasks, but the exception will remain handled by humans. A bit like you said, the epiphany will have to come from the human. The creativity there will still be human based. I think probably, and then maybe it will evolve and be able to do more, but that's an interesting future to look for, I think.
Yeah, years ago, I had some friends in graduate school, and they were studying some very. I mean, they still had COBOL and Fortran and all this kind of stuff. And a friend of mine, he finally sees Jack. The easiest way to think of it is a computer chip is like a big series of on-off switches, and I understand that. I get that, you know, and how it comes out and you're able to program it. And I said that makes a lot of sense to me. But that's binary. That's what binary is.
I think sustainability and environment get a lot of also traction. So I would expect to see a new generation of environmental specialists and managers coming out. You've been doing it for 40 years. What would be the one piece of what we talked about, the following up what's happening, but what would be the one thing that you would tell your that next generation coming out on how to handle environmental and technology in the future?
To me, I think the biggest thing, and we're seeing it right now, is you need to keep things real. There's all kinds of, and I'm even seeing it in my world a lot. There's disinformation, misinformation, real information. I always teach to whatever you do, start in reality, a measurement of some sort. I remember when the Clean Air Act of 1990 came out, and I was only into environment a few years then, and these consultants, they would say, "Oh, well, we're going to start and we'll use Avogadro's number against the density of the material," and they come out with all these predictions of these emissions, and they were coming out with tons of stuff, and I'm like, "Wait a minute, we haven't put a ton of stuff through the process. How can you have tons of emissions coming out and you don't have a ton of anything in the process?" You know, mass balance. So that would be my thing, is just stay real, stay grounded, understand not how things work, but why they work. And that'll help you a lot in this field. The other part of it, unfortunately, is environment is very political. It's it's one that easily gets people riled up. And you're from Belgium, you know all about the ones over there. And it's something that they can really go off the rails. And the hard part's being real and what can we do? What's possible? And there is a lot. There really is. But you have to keep with the basics. You have to keep it real.
Okay. But it sounds like there's still a lot of work for environmental managers in the future to tackle, handle, deal with, and continue in making product programs that are sturdy and successful.
Well, let's go back to demographics. When I was in my early 20s, I think there was 4 billion people in the world, and now there's 7 or 8. And all those people want a good life. They're all part of the environment. It comes down to logistics. I mean, we're going to have to figure out ways to make it work. So yeah, there's going to be work.
Definitely. Well, that's good. That's good for everybody who's training in the environmental field and also the industrial field, because I think those will be more linked in the future than they ever been.
Oh, they have to be, because the one problem is that everyone's going to have to be brought up to a better level and standard of living to make this work. And that will take industry to help get us here.
Indeed. Jack, it's been a really great discussion. Thank you very much for sharing all your insights. If listeners want to connect with you or follow your work, where should they go?
Right now, I'm not a big person on social media, but I do have a LinkedIn account, and you see my name there. You look me up, you'll find me. I'm in a suit on that picture.
All right. Thank you so much.
And that wraps up today's conversation. Thank you for tuning into the show where hands-on leaders with decades of experience show us how to make safety and environmental performance more practical. If you want to explore how TenForce helps industrial teams turn better processes into safer operations, visit us at tenforce.com or visit tenforce.com/podcast to explore more episodes and get practical resources you can use right away. And we'll see you next time.